In this video, I'm going to show you how to decorate this adorable construction theme cake using edible images. And just a quick note, I don't show how I print and use the edible images in this video because I'm trying to keep it short. However, I do have videos showing you how to resize your edible images and how to print them, cut them out, and put them on your cake. And that will be linked in the description. And I will also let you know how much I charged. So let's get started. All right, so here are the edible images that I printed. And again, I do have videos showing you how I do this. And I just get a little bit of piping gel on the back and then put them on a piece of fondant and cut it out. And after I cut anything out of fondant, I always smooth my cuts. And then I want to set these aside flat to dry for a couple days. Now, I'm going over to my refrigerator and I'm measuring the circumference and the height of this cake to make sure that I can roll this fondant out the correct size. Now I have Tylose powder mixed into my fondant. I only use marshmallow fondant. That will be linked in the description, but the Tylose powder is going to help it set up harder and make it a lot easier to work with. So I'm rolling out this black fondant really long, then using my fondant smoother to smooth it out and make sure that it is long enough that I can wrap it around the cake. Use my pizza cutter to cut a straight edge at the bottom. Then it had to be 4 3/4 inches tall, so I'm aligning the 4 3/4 with that straight edge and then just making a dotted line with my pizza cutter and connecting those dots so I can cut this to the correct height. Then I got my cake out of the refrigerator and I got a little bit of piping gel on this brush. I'm getting piping gel all along the outside, and then I like to dip my brush into some water and run that along the outside. That just thins out the piping gel a little bit and makes it a little bit easier to move the fondant around when it's on the cake. And I always want to make sure that I find the front of the cake, which is most symmetrical, and I just like to take a little tool and mark an arrow so I know where the front is, and I'm rolling that black fondant from one end to the other so it's all lined at the bottom. Start in the very back and I'm unrolling it around the cake. That way no air bubbles are forming and it's pressing against that piping gel, and then where it overlaps, I'm just putting my ruler down and then getting my X-Acto knife, cutting through both pieces and then removing that back piece, and then I can press the seam together. And now I'm just using my hands and I'm trying to make sure that this is touching the very top of the cake and then the fondant is touching the cake board. So I'm just using my hands to drag it up if it needs to go up and down if it needs to go down so it's all even, and then use my fondant smoother to smooth it out. Now I have some Crisco in a paintbrush and I want to really deepen this black because a lot of that cornstarch got on there. So I am just wiping this Crisco all around this entire cake. And then after that's done, I'm going to get a dry paper towel, fold it in half a couple times, and I'm just spinning the turntable and just trying to remove this excess shortening. So I'm just trying to find clean areas on the paper towel and doing it again until I remove all of it, and look how beautiful that looks. Now I need to make a template for these stripes, so I'm just using my cutter to make sure I cut an even strip and then holding it up against the cake. And I want to cut this on an angle because it's going to be like a caution lines, and those lines are kind of on an angle. So you see what I'm doing? I'm creating this template so I can make sure that I cut these fondant strips on the correct angle, and that looks pretty good. So I go over to my yellow fondant. I rolled it out really thin. Again, it has this Tylose powder mixed into it, and I have my ribbon cutter. I'm just making sure this ribbon cutter is the right width, that same width of that little template that I made. And I'm just using my cutter to cut out a bunch of these strips. After I cut them out, I take my fingers and just smooth the edges, and then I take my rulers and just straighten them so they can dry in the correct shape. And then I'm laying the template on top and cutting the top and the bottom. This way I have the correct angle on all of these. And now I have a little bit of piping gel, and I'm also going to use some water. I want to cover that seam in the very back. So I'm starting in the back. I'm getting some piping gel down, but I thought I wanted to use water instead. You can use either one. It really doesn't matter. And then I'm just starting at the very bottom and making sure that this is on an angle so the top of that yellow piece meets the top of the black fondant. Use my little spatula to make sure that it is nice and even. And then I have a piece of a strip that I cut, which is that same width, and I'm using that as a spacer to make sure that I space these evenly apart. And that little yellow piece is sticking to the fondant because it has some of that Crisco on there and it's sticking, so that's good. If not, you could just get a little Crisco behind it and stick it down. And then I just remove that little spacer, and I'm trying to get this strip perfectly straight, use my paper towel to remove a mark that spacer made, and then I'm just going to continue the process. So put the spacer down and then get some water or piping gel behind the strip and stick that down. And then I'm going to remove the spacer, take my paper towel, remove the mark that it made, and then use my spatula to make sure everything is nice and pretty. And then in the very back of the cake, it's not perfectly spaced out, so I just made sure that I put it in between both of those, and that's why it's the back of the cake. So I always start in the back and then work my way around, and that looks good. Let's put that back in the refrigerator. Now I have a piece of non-slip pad underneath my cutting board, an X-Acto knife with a wet paper towel, a Dresden tool, and a little bit of water. And I measured my cake and I made sure I printed that out the size I wanted it to be. I rolled my yellow fondant out real thin. Don't pay attention to my nails. I slammed my thumb in a car door, and it just is what it is right now with my nails. But I'm doing my trace cut and smooth method to create this name and number. So I'm taking my Dresden tool and tracing all of these letters through the paper so the line transfers onto the fondant. And then I want to take my X-Acto knife and cut all of these out. And anytime I cut anything out of fondant, the edges are going to be jagged and I need to make it look pretty. So I'm using my fingers and my tools to smooth my cuts and realign that back on top of the picture. Now for the same thing for the number, I am just tracing it onto this yellow fondant, cut it out, smooth my cuts, and this has a little background, so I rolled out this black fondant pretty thick, get some water behind it, and I'm sticking that yellow fondant down on top. And since this is a thicker piece of fondant, I need to create a guideline first, so I'm just sticking the tip of my X-Acto knife in here, and I'm cutting an even black border around the whole thing. And then once I have that done, I'm going to stick the tip all the way down to the cutting board and cut this out. Once you have that guideline, you're not going to really mess up the top edge of the fondant. And then I'm going to flip it over, use my fingers and my tools just to smooth all those jagged edges, and then flip it right side up and do the same exact thing. Set that on the cutting board and let's set that aside. Now I'm making the brick, so I'm rolling that brown fondant out, and then I'm using my fondant smoother to remove any air bubbles. I have this brick impression mat. I don't know if they make the same one, but I'll try to find similar ones and link them below. And I'm just pressing down on all of these little bricks to make sure that this transfers. This impression mat is really shallow. It's kind of annoying. I don't really love this one, but you can see what I'm doing. And then I'm realigning that mat so the pattern continues, and just doing this along the entire strip of that light brown fondant and carefully peeling it back because it's starting to stick. Then I'm taking my pizza cutter and just cutting a straight line using the lines in the brick as a guide, and these are going to be the borders around the top two tiers. So I'm cutting a thinner border for the top tier and a thicker border for the middle tier. Use my rulers to straighten it out. And then I just want to cut out some of these bricks just to give it a little visual interest. So you can see I'm taking my X-Acto knife and just following the lines that are in here, just to make it look like, just to give it a little more visual interest, if you will, looking like the bricks are stacked. So everything isn't all even. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. I just chose to do it just to add, like I said, a little more visual interest. And then I'm making this one for the name. So I'm cutting a long rectangle and I'm centering the letters on there. And then I want to take my X-Acto knife and cut some of the bricks out. But I didn't want to do it without the name on top because I wanted to make sure that I'm not cutting too far into it. So I'm doing it on the top, the sides, and on the bottom. And then I'm going to remove those because I'm going to airbrush them later. And I'm doing a bunch of little pieces as well that I'm going to stick around the side of the cake. You will see what I mean when I actually decorate it. It'll make sense. So now I have my airbrush gun. You don't want to pull the trigger all the way back, just a little bit. So I have some brown airbrush color. You must use airbrush color in an airbrush gun. And I always test it on a little paper towel. And then I am spraying all of the edges. So I'm going around the bottom and then around the top edge and then doing a little bit in the middle. So I still want some color variation. So that's why I'm doing the darker edges and just a little bit in the center. That way, I don't know, I just think it looks better when it's not all one color, when you have a little bit of depth. It gives a little bit more interest to the look of your cake. So I'm going to set these aside to dry before I put them on the cake. While they are drying, I'm going to stack it. So I get the bottom tier out of my fridge, and I'm using my sewing ruler to measure how tall the straw should be. Mark it with a Sharpie marker at the end, and then I'm going to cut that Sharpie marker off and throw that piece away. And I'm putting all these straws in the bottom tier. Make sure that it is level, and then I'm going to get down some icing and stack this cake. So I'm going to get that middle tier out of the refrigerator and stack that on top. I do have a video where I go into full detail on how I stack my cakes, and I'm going to link that below. below. But all of my cakes are refrigerated, so that icing is cold and hard, and I can handle these without messing them up. And I doweled the cake, and now I'm getting some piping gel around the base of the top 2 tiers. Why was that so hard to say? And I'm starting in the very back and wrapping these little borders around where it meets in the back. I'm cutting it, get a little bit of piping gel behind it, and stick that down. And I'm doing the same thing for the top tier as well. And now I have my edible images that were drying for a few days, so I want to put that up against the cake first and make sure that I had enough room for this little name banner. So I got some piping gel behind it, and I'm making sure that is facing front and center. And then I'm paying attention to where this piece is touching the cake. The entire thing isn't touching the cake because it's flat, so I'm getting some icing behind it where it's touching the cake and then pressing it down. You don't want to use too much icing because you don't want it seeping out the sides, just enough to make it stick. So again, I hold it up against the cake, see where it's touching it, and then press it down. Now this one, that very top part was going to go against the cake, but I didn't want icing seeping out, so I opted to use piping gel. I use icing, I use water, I use piping gel. It just all depends on my mood, on how I want to stick things to the cake. Now I am screwing a skewer through that black piece of fondant. That's why I rolled that black fondant out really thick. I'm putting 2 toothpicks on either side, getting some icing underneath it and pressing that down. Any icing that's seeped out, I'm taking a dry paintbrush and removing it. And now I'm getting some piping gel behind all of these letters and sticking these to that little brick piece, and then I'm doing the same thing. So I'm getting some piping gel behind all of these other little brick pieces and sticking those to the side of the cake. And now I have some piping gel. I want to get some of this Oreo cookie dirt down here, and I want to cover this entire white part with the piping gel so the cookie dirt sticks to it. And these are Oreo cookies. It's the entire cookie, not just the chocolate part. It's the chocolate and the cream. I put it in a food processor and blend it up until it's into a fine crumb. And this part is tedious. I'm working in small sections, trying not to get the crumbs everywhere. And now I have these little cones that I also printed out on my edible printer. And I'm getting some icing behind it where it's touching the one, and then just taking my dry paintbrush and removing any icing that is seeping out the sides. But again, paying attention to where they are touching the cake and sticking those down. And then I'm getting some piping gel down on the cake and just sprinkling some of this Oreo cookie dirt in random places, just on the very top of the cake and on the top of the middle tier as well. And here is the finished cake. How cool is that? So there you go. How cute is this cake? And I just love these edible images that I used. And in that video where I show you how to resize cakes, I show you how to go to Etsy and purchase any images that you would like to use for your cakes, to download them and print them on your edible printer. Now, where do I get all of my edible printing supplies? I get them from ICING Images, and I've been shopping there forever. However, I am affiliated with them, and you can use the code Karolyns, K-A, for 10% off. That will all be linked in the description. And I do have the Platinum entry-level edible printer system, which comes with the printer, the icing sheets, the cartridges and ink and cleaner, everything that you need to get started. So this cake on the inside, the top tier is a 2-layer not torted 4-inch. The middle tier is a 2-layer torted 6-inch, and the bottom tier is a 2-layer torted 8-inch. And I have a video where I talk about when I tort and when I don't tort my cakes, and I will link that in the description. It feeds 40 to 50 people. And how much did I charge? This one I did at a slight discount for my friend. I charged $4.75, but it would probably be around $525 normally. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave it in the comments below. And just a reminder, I do have ebooks with all of my favorite recipes. I have my signature scratch pound cake recipes, my best doctored cake mix recipes, my favorite buttercream icing and filling recipes, along with my favorite numbers and my favorite fonts. So they will all be linked in the description. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you're enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is down below. Why do I always do that? And I would love it if you would keep in touch on socials, and you could check out my website. And if you want to stick around so you can watch this video next, and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys, and remember, it's cake, have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.